The guns were already cocked. Kang Jae-min, the most feared name in Seoul's underworld, was on his knees, hands bound, head bowed, surrounded by the very men who had sworn their lives to him. The betrayal was so precise, so perfectly timed, that even he hadn't seen it coming. One trigger pull. That was all that stood between the king of Seoul's criminal empire and a cold, inglorious end on the marble floor of his own council hall. And then, from the back of the room, elevator doors slid open, and a voice cut through the silence like a blade. Calm, unbothered, devastating. The kind of voice that didn't ask for a room's attention, it simply took it. Nobody in that hall knew yet that the quiet black woman stepping out of that elevator wasn't just the boss's wife. She was the reason every single one of them was about to regret the night they chose to cross Kang Jae-min. Welcome to Afro Tales, besties. If you're new here, you're so welcome to the family. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories just like this. Now, let's get into it. The night it all began had started like any other Tuesday in Seoul. Karen Osei arrived at the Kang estate carrying three things: a suitcase, a folder of signed legal documents, and absolutely no illusions about the kind of man she was marrying. She was not in love. That was the arrangement. She was a strategic intelligence consultant, one of the sharpest analytical minds in her field, and Kang Jae-min was the head of the most powerful criminal organization in South Korea. The marriage had been brokered 18 months earlier through channels Karen preferred not to think about too carefully. What she knew was this: Jaemin needed a wife who could move through diplomatic circles without raising flags. Karen needed funding for the intelligence firm she was quietly building. It was business. Clean. Transactional. She told herself that every single day. The Kang estate rose against the Seoul skyline like something from another world, black marble, floor-to-ceiling glass, surrounded by gardens that were almost violently beautiful. Karen stepped out of the car, smoothed the front of her emerald-wrapped dress, and looked up at the building with the calm, assessing expression she'd trained herself to wear whenever she walked into unknown territory. A man in a black suit opened the door before she could knock. "Mrs. Kang," he said. She didn't correct him. Inside, the estate was just as architectural and cold as it looked from the outside, except for the kitchen, where the smell of doenjang jjigae drifted faintly through the air, warm and unexpected. Karen paused in the hallway, almost startled by it. "My housekeeper," said a voice behind her. She turned. Kang Jae-min stood at the top of the curved staircase in a charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open. He was exactly as his photographs had shown: severe jaw, dark eyes, the kind of stillness that made a room feel like it was holding its breath. But photographs hadn't captured the way he looked at her. Not with appreciation. Not with dismissal. With something that felt uncomfortably like recognition. "Mr. Kang," she said. "Jaemin," he corrected, and came down the stairs slowly, eyes never leaving her face. "We're married, Karen. You can use my name." She met his gaze without flinching. "We signed papers." "That's not the same thing." Something moved across his face. Almost a smile. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The first 2 weeks were a study in careful distance. They were polite. Formal. They had separate wings, separate schedules, and they met at dinner precisely 3 times a week. Jaemin's stipulation, something about appearances with the household staff. Karen ate, answered questions when asked, and spent most of her time in the private office she'd claimed on the second floor, working. She was always working. She noticed things because noticing things was what she'd trained herself to do. She noticed that Jaemin's men were loyal but not happy. She noticed the way Park Dae-sung, Jaemin's second-in-command, watched his boss during the rare evenings they were all in the same room together, with an expression that was too careful to be neutral. She noticed that Park smiled at her a beat too long, a beat too warm, as though he was already calculating something. She filed all of it away. What she hadn't expected to notice, what annoyed her considerably, was Jaemin himself. The way he always set a cup of tea outside her office door at 10 p.m. without knocking. The way he remembered she didn't eat cilantro, 3 weeks in, before she'd even told him. The way he stood at the edge of any room she was in with an expression that wasn't possessive or predatory, it was watchful. Protective. like he was standing guard over something he hadn't yet decided how to name. She told herself it was strategy. Men like him didn't do anything without reason. It was control dressed as care. She almost believed it. A few days later, a council meeting was called. Karen wasn't invited, obviously. She wasn't part of that world. That had been the agreement. But she was an intelligence consultant by training, which meant she did not need an invitation to see a room. She worked quietly from her office while the lower levels of the estate hummed with activity, and she listened. She had always been good at listening. By 9:30 that evening, she'd heard enough. She sat for a long time in the dark of her office, the Seoul skyline blazing beyond the glass, her tea growing cold in her hands. Then she picked up her phone and made 4 calls. Quiet calls. The kind of calls that moved things without making noise. She did not tell Jae-min what she'd heard. Not yet. Because Karen Osei was not the kind of woman who moved without a plan. And the plan she was beginning to build was going to require patience, precision, and the particular kind of ruthlessness she'd spent years learning to keep quiet inside herself. She could be patient. She was very, very good at waiting. The following weeks were the strangest of Karen's life. On the surface, nothing changed. She attended 2 diplomatic dinners on Jaemin's arm, wore the kind of dresses that made other women reach for their pearls, spoke 4 languages with calm fluency, and made exactly the kind of impression that Jaemin needed her to make. She was elegant, unreadable, the perfect accessory. Under the surface, she was building a net. She spent her mornings reviewing footage, her afternoons on encrypted calls with former colleagues, her evenings studying the financial architecture of Jaemin's empire, mapping the fault lines, locating every stress point. She wasn't just watching the coup grow, she was cataloging it, documenting it, letting it ripen. And somewhere in between all of that, something she hadn't planned for started happening. She started noticing Jaemin differently. It happened slowly, the way things you don't want to feel tend to happen in small, stubborn increments. She noticed the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was frustrated, but didn't want to show it. The way he spoke to the estate's elderly housekeeper, Mrs. O, with a gentleness that was completely at odds with everything else about him. She noticed the night he found her still working at 2 in the morning and didn't say anything, just set a plate of rice and kimchi beside her laptop and left without a word. She ate it. Every bite. She told herself it meant nothing. And then came the dinner with Chairman Yoon. Chairman Yoon was 80 years old, one of the most powerful figures in the council's elder tier, and had the manners of a man who believed women existed primarily for decoration. He sat across from Karen at a private dinner, looked through her for most of the evening, and then, midway through the second course, patted her hand and said to Jaemin, with the indulgent smile of a man sharing a private joke, "You've done well for yourself." She's quite striking. A trophy wife and a foreign one at that. How novel. The table went very quiet. Karen set down her chopsticks with precise calm. Before she could speak, she felt Jaemin's hand close over hers beneath the table, not squeezing, not restraining. Just there. Present. And then he looked at Chairman Yoon with the particular quality of stillness he carried like a weapon. "My wife," he said, "has forgotten more about geopolitical intelligence infrastructure than anyone at this table will ever learn." "I'd be very careful, Chairman, about what you choose to call novel." Yoon blinked. Karen looked at Jaemin. He didn't look back at her. He simply picked up his glass and took a slow sip, the picture of ease. But his hand stayed over hers for the rest of the meal, warm and certain, and Karen felt something shift in her chest that she absolutely did not have time for. Later that night, she found him in the garden. He was standing with his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking out at the city. She should have gone to bed. She came outside instead. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. I can fight my own battles." "I know that too." He turned, and in the low garden light, his face was softer than she'd ever seen it. "I wanted to." She studied him for a long moment. The Seoul skyline hummed beyond the hedges. Somewhere in the estate, a clock chimed midnight. "Jaemin," she said carefully. "What is this?" He looked at her with those quiet, dangerous eyes. "What do you want it to be?" She didn't answer. She turned and went back inside. But long after she'd closed her bedroom door, She could still feel the warmth of his hand over hers, settled there like something that had always been meant to stay. The following week, Park Dae-sung made his move on Karen. It wasn't dramatic. It was calculated. He appeared at the estate one afternoon when Jaemin was away, all smooth charm and easy smiles, and sat across from Karen in the main salon as if they were old friends. "You must find it lonely," he said, tilting his head. "He keeps you very separate from everything real. All these dinners and appearances, that's not a life, Karen. You deserve more than being window dressing for a man like him." Karen looked at him over the rim of her glass. "Is there a point coming?" Park smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I just think someone with your intelligence deserves to be seen properly." Karen set her glass down. "Park Dae-sung," she said pleasantly, "I have been in this business long enough to recognize a recruitment pitch when I hear one. And I want you to hear me very clearly when I tell you, you're several months too late and several steps too slow." Park's smile flickered. "Have a safe drive back," she said, and stood up. She was almost at the door when he said, softer, "He'll never choose you over the Empire, you know. Men like him don't." She paused. Didn't turn around. "I know exactly what kind of man he is," she said quietly. "The question is whether you know what kind of woman I am." She walked out. She did not tell Jaemin about Park's visit. But Jaemin found out anyway. She came down to the kitchen at 7 the next morning to find him already there, still in the clothes from the night before, a cup of coffee cold in his hand, his jaw set in a way she'd never seen. "He came here," Jaemin said. It wasn't a question. Karen poured herself coffee. It was handled. "Karen." She looked up. The way he said her name, 2 syllables, low and tight with something that was barely controlled, made the air in the kitchen feel different. "I handled it," she said again, steadily. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his gaze. He wasn't angry at her. She understood that immediately. He was angry at himself. At the fact that something had come within arm's reach of her, and he hadn't been there. "This won't happen again," he said. "It was fine, Jaemin. It won't happen again." His voice dropped. "I won't let it." She looked at him for a long moment. At the hard line of his jaw, the dark intensity in his eyes, the way his hands had curled at his sides like he was physically holding himself in place. "Okay," she said softly. Something in him exhaled. "Drop a comment right now if you're feeling this tension between them, because we are not okay. Keep going, bestie. It only gets bigger from here." 3 weeks later, Karen's net was complete. Every meeting documented. Every secret communication recorded. Every face at every table where Park Dae-sung had sat and plotted the fall of Kang Jae-min captured. Karen had worked quietly, methodically, and with the particular cold precision of someone who had spent years learning exactly how criminal empires rotted from the inside. She knew the date of the coup before Park did. She knew the location, the attendees, the plan. She knew which of Jaemin's guards had been turned. She knew which of the council members were waiting to see which way the wind blew before they committed. She also knew something Park had never considered. She had already turned 4 of his people. On the night before the council meeting, she sat in her office until 3 in the morning, reviewing everything one final time. She heard Jaemin's footsteps in the hall. He was a night owl, always had been, and then the soft sound of a cup being set outside her door. She opened it. He was already walking away. "Jaemin." He stopped. She stood in her doorway, surrounded by the blue light of her monitors, and looked at the man she had married for business, this complicated, guarded, quietly devoted man who put tea outside her door and defended her at dinner tables and stood in gardens at midnight with his sleeves rolled up as though the city below belonged to him and grief and love in equal measure. "I need you to trust me tomorrow," she said. He turned around slowly. His eyes moved over her face, reading something there that she wasn't fully ready to name. "I already do," he said. She nodded. Swallowed. "Go to the meeting," she said. "Don't change anything. Don't warn anyone. Just go." A long pause. The hallway was very quiet. "Karen," he said carefully. "What do you know?" "Everything," she said. "I've known for weeks." The stillness that came over him then was different from his usual stillness. Deeper. Like the ground shifting beneath a mountain. "You knew," he said slowly, "and you didn't tell me. Because I needed them all in one place." She held his gaze. "Go to the meeting, Jaemin." "I'll be there." He stared at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she'd never seen before, something unguarded and enormous and barely contained. "Don't be late," he said quietly. "I'm never late," she said. The night of the council meeting, Kang Jae-min walked into the underground hall at the appointed time and took his seat like a man who owned the ground beneath every chair. He watched Park Dae-sung across the table with eyes that gave nothing away. He waited. He was almost impressed by how precisely it unfolded, the doors sealing, the guards turning, Park rising from his seat with that particular smile of a man who believes he has already won. The room filled with the sound of weapons being cocked. The council members shifting in their chairs, unsure, watching. Park's voice carrying over the assembled empire like a proclamation. The era of Kang Jae-min ends tonight. Jae-min was forced to his knees. He let it happen. Because Karen had said, "Trust me." He watched Park step forward. Watched the guns point. Felt the weight of the room pressing down, the council's fear, their uncertainty, Park's triumphant certainty. He kept his breathing slow. Kept his face still. Kept his eyes on the back of the hall. Waiting. And then the elevator doors opened. Karen stepped out in a simple black dress, her natural hair pinned up, her face carrying the particular expression of a woman who had walked into far worse rooms than this and walked out the other side. The laughter started almost immediately. She'd expected that. She walked forward through it. "Take her away," Park said, waving a dismissive hand. "Women don't belong here." Karen stopped directly beside her kneeling husband. She did not look at him yet. She looked at Park. "If you kill my husband tonight," she said, her voice carrying through the hall with perfect clarity, "none of you will leave this building alive." More laughter. Park shook his head like a man tolerating a child. "You're either very brave," he said, "or incredibly stupid." "I've been called both." Karen pulled out her phone. Pressed one button. The lights went out. In the dark, the laughter died. Alarms began to ring, faint at first, then louder, the unmistakable sound of security perimeters being breached. Through the hall's high windows, the sweep of floodlights from the vehicles surrounding the compound strobed across panicked faces. Emergency lighting flickered on, red-tinted and cold. Park's men were moving, looking at each other, reaching for their phones to find dead signals and jammed communications. The council members, who moments ago had been watching a coronation, were now watching something else entirely. Karen stood at the center of it all, completely still. "You spent months planning this coup," she said, her voice carrying into every corner of the hall. "But none of you stopped to ask one question." She let the silence hold for a beat. "Who actually controls this empire?" The whispers started in the back of the room. The older council members, the ones who'd been in the game long enough to recognize a sprung trap when they were standing in it, had already gone very, very quiet. Park's eyes narrowed. "Kill them both. Now." He turned to his guards. And 3 of them turned their weapons on him instead. The confusion that broke through the hall was instantaneous and beautiful in the way only perfectly executed plans ever are. Park staggered back. "What? Did you really think," Karen said quietly, "that I didn't know what you were planning?" The room went very still. Even the alarm seemed to fade. "I found out 6 weeks ago," she continued. "I didn't stop the meeting. I didn't warn the council. I let every person involved in this coup walk through those doors tonight, because tonight, I needed you all in one room." She looked around slowly at the assembled faces. "You didn't expose my husband. You exposed yourselves to me." The realization was visible. It moved through the room like a wave, the moment each person understood that the coup had never been a coup. It had been a confession booth. And they had all walked in willingly. Jae-min rose from his knees. Nobody moved to stop him. He stood at his full height, straightened his jacket, and looked at Park Dae-sung with the expression of a man who had been given a very expensive gift. Several figures stepped forward from different points around the room, loyal men who had been working quietly under Karen's direction for weeks. They moved into position with the silent coordination of people who had rehearsed this moment. Park looked at Karen with an expression that was finally honest. It was fear. "How?" he said. "Are you shaking right now?" "Because we are." Like this video if you did not see this coming, and subscribe because this is only getting better. Stay with us. Karen clasped her hands. Before I married Jae-min, she said, I spent 8 years as a strategic intelligence analyst. I specialized in one particular area. A pause. Dismantling criminal empires. The hall was absolutely silent. I've studied organizational collapse in 14 countries. I know how betrayals are structured, how loyalty is manufactured, how men like you convince themselves they're inevitable. She looked at Park steadily. I didn't marry into this world blindly. I came in with my eyes completely open. Even Jae-min was still. She felt him beside her, not looking at Park, but at her. She could feel the weight of his attention like a hand on her shoulder. She'd figure out what to do about that later. Park's composure had fully cracked now. He was breathing hard, his eyes darting, the architecture of his certainty collapsing in real time. You're protecting him, he spat. That's all this is. You're doing this for him, like some. Park. Her voice cut across his with quiet finality. She turned and looked at Jae-min for the first time since entering the room. His face was open in a way she had never seen it. No walls. No performance. Just Jae-min, looking at her like she was something he couldn't fully process and couldn't look away from. When I married him, she said, still holding his gaze, I chose his world. She turned back to the room. Which means anyone who threatens him, threatens me. And I don't forgive threats. Silence. Then Park grabbed a gun. He was across the room in seconds, arm around Jae-min's neck, gun pressed to his temple. The council members scattered. The loyal guards raised their weapons. The whole room became a held breath. Back up. Park's voice had gone ragged. Back up or I. Park, Karen said. Just his name. Calm. Almost gentle. He looked at her over Jae-min's shoulder, breathing hard, his eyes wild. And she smiled. Not a cruel smile. Something quieter than that. The smile of a woman who had already won and was only now allowing it to show. Look at the speakers, she said. Park's eyes moved upward. In the corner of the room, mounted discreetly near the ceiling, small, sophisticated, state-of-the-art. 63 recordings, Karen said. 31 meetings. Every conversation, every plan, every name you dropped while you thought you were invisible. A beat. The council has already received the files. So have 3 external parties I won't name. She tilted her head. You have approximately 4 minutes before this becomes completely irreversible. But I think it already is. Park's hand was shaking. You walked in here tonight thinking you were taking a throne, Karen said softly. But you were on trial the moment you sat down. The gun lowered. Not all at once, slowly, in increments, like a man deflating. Park was taken by the room before he hit the floor. The silence that followed was enormous. Jae-min stood in the center of it, breathing steadily, watching as his men took Park from the hall. He watched the council members, some pale, some grim, some wearing the carefully neutral expressions of people who had correctly waited to see which way the wind blew and were now committing, visibly, to the winning side. One by one, the older council members bowed their heads. First to Jae-min. Then, slowly, to Karen. Jae-min turned. Karen was standing a few feet away, phone tucked back in her hand, the emergency lighting turning her face in shades of red and shadow. She looked tired, he realized. Not broken, never broken. But tired, the way a person looks when they've been holding something very heavy for a very long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. He walked toward her. She looked up at him. He didn't know where to start. He was Kang Jae-min. He had faced down prosecutors, rivals, corrupt politicians, and men with guns for 20 years without flinching. He had never in his life been at a genuine loss for control of a situation. And yet, standing in front of this woman, in the wreckage of the night she had just dismantled and rebuilt with her bare hands, he felt something in him come undone in a way that was entirely unfamiliar and entirely irrevocable. All this time, he said. You were protecting me. Karen looked at him steadily. Something in her face was very careful. It was the job. Karen. I had the skills. It made sense too. Karen. He said her name quietly. She stopped. He reached up and touched her face, just his hand against her cheek, gentle in a way that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. Thank you. Her breath caught. She covered his hand with hers, very briefly, and then stepped back. We should deal with the aftermath. The council will need. The council can wait 10 minutes. She looked at him. He was watching her with those dark, open eyes, and the hall was emptying around them, and Seoul hummed somewhere above them, and the distance between them felt like the most significant thing in the room. I wasn't protecting a mafia boss, she said quietly. He waited. I was protecting my husband. The weeks that followed were quieter than any that had come before them. Park and the remaining conspirators were handled by the council in the way such things were handled, thoroughly, finally, without spectacle. The loyal members of the organization moved back into position. The empire held. Karen filed a report, organized her notes, updated several encrypted drives. She was very methodical about it. She was less methodical about everything else. Because things had changed, and she was honest enough with herself to stop pretending they hadn't. Jaemin had always been watchful, but now he was present in a different way. He knocked before coming to her office. He sat across from her at dinner and actually talked, not about appearances or strategy or empire logistics, but about other things. Books. Cities he'd been to. Questions about her work, her past, the 8 years she'd spent mapping criminal architectures before she'd ever set foot in Seoul. He listened the way very few people ever had. She started cooking on Sundays. Nothing elaborate, just things her mother had taught her, Nigerian dishes that smelled of home and took too long and required patience. She normally rationed carefully. The first time she made jollof rice, Jaemin appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression that was entirely unguarded. "That smell," he said. "Jollof." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "You either love it or you're wrong." He ate 3 bowls. She pretended not to notice how pleased that made her. But there were things that didn't resolve so easily. One evening, 3 weeks after the council meeting, she came back to the estate from an off-site meeting to find Jaemin in the main salon with a woman she didn't know, late 20s, impeccably put together. The particular kind of beautiful that arrives knowing exactly what it's doing. She was laughing at something Jaemin had said. Her hand was on his arm. Karen stopped in the doorway. She did not make a scene. She was not a person who made scenes. She turned and went to her office. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she didn't care. She reminded herself, in precise internal language, that this was a business arrangement, that she had no claim on him, that whatever had shifted between them over the past weeks was. She was still telling herself this when Jaemin knocked on her office door 30 minutes later. She opened it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "That was Lee Seon," he said. "The daughter of a council associate. She's been angling for an introduction to a colleague of mine in Tokyo." It was a 15-minute meeting about a business referral. A pause. "I had Mrs. O stay in the room." Karen said nothing. "I noticed you came home," he said. "I live here," she said. "Karen." She looked away. The Seoul skyline was doing its usual blazing thing beyond the window, indifferent and brilliant. "I don't have any claim on," she started. "What if I want you to?" he said. She stopped. He stepped into the room. He moved the way he always did, with that quiet, certain deliberateness, like a man who had decided where he was going and saw no reason to hurry because he was already there. He stopped close enough that she could see the steadiness in his face, the thing behind his eyes that had been building for months and was now, clearly, done being patient. "I don't know how to do this gently," he said. "I've tried. I'm not built for gentle." He searched her face. "But I know what I feel. I know what you are to me. And I know the difference between a contract and a choice." Karen's throat tightened. "You told me, the night before the meeting, that you needed me to trust you," he said. "I need you to trust me now." She looked at him for a long moment. At this man who was ruthless and powerful and feared by half of Seoul and put tea outside her office door at 10 p.m. and had stood in front of a room full of mafia bosses and defended her honor without being asked. "I don't know how to do this either," she said quietly. "That's fine." Something in him softened by degrees. "We'll figure it out. If your heart is doing the most right now, same, bestie, same. Hit that subscribe button because you do not want to miss where this goes." For a while, they figured it out slowly, in the way that people who are both extremely private and extremely stubborn tend to figure things out, sideways, incrementally, in small moments that accumulated into something neither of them could argue with. Morning coffee. Evening walks in the garden when neither of them could sleep. The discovery that Jamin had strong opinions about architecture and embarrassingly little knowledge of West African history, and Karen's cheerful willingness to remedy both, and the way he listened to her talk with the particular quality of attention that made her feel like every word she said was worth memorizing. She was happy. She recognized it with some surprise. She had been a lot of things in her life: competent, focused, driven, occasionally lonely in the way that competent, focus-driven people often are, but happiness had always felt slightly adjacent to her, something that happened in other directions. Now it was here, in this strange mafia estate in Seoul, with this complicated, quiet man who was slowly becoming the most important person in her world. Which was precisely when everything tried to fall apart. The threat came from outside the empire. A rival organization, the Shin Network, based out of Busan, had been watching the aftermath of Park's coup attempt with considerable interest. They had seen the destabilization and decided it was an opportunity. What they hadn't counted on was how quickly Jamin had rebuilt. What they decided to target instead was Karen. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. She was returning from a meeting in the city, alone because she'd insisted on it. She was not a person who required an escort, she'd said, and Jamin had argued for exactly 40 minutes before she'd gotten in the car. She was 3 blocks from the estate when the vehicle was stopped. She didn't panic. She was the wrong person to kidnap if you were hoping for panic. But she was also, for the first time in a long time, genuinely afraid, not for herself, but for the look she knew would be on Jamin's face when he found out. She was held for 6 hours in a location she clocked as a converted warehouse in the Mapo district, which was honestly a little unimaginative. Her captors were professional but not exceptional. She spent the time memorizing faces, listening to conversations she wasn't meant to hear, and building a very detailed internal map of the building. She was also thinking about Jamin. She knew what he would do when he found out she was gone. She knew it in the same way she knew the sound of his footsteps in the hall and the precise temperature he kept his coffee and the way his jaw went tight when he was afraid but didn't want to show it. She knew him, she realized. She had spent all those months reading the empire around him, and without noticing, she had also read him completely, carefully, the way she read everything that mattered. She was thinking about this when the warehouse door came off its hinges. Later, she would piece together what had happened from secondary accounts, because she had not been in a position to see it directly. Jamin had identified the location within 3 hours of her disappearance. He had not waited for intelligence confirmation. He had not called a council meeting or waited for legal approval or done any of the things that should be done before a sitting mafia boss descends on a rival organization's holding facility with a small army. He had gone himself. He came through the door with 4 of his best men and the particular expression of someone who has moved past anger entirely into something colder and more absolute. When he found her unharmed, sitting upright, with the expression of a woman who had been mildly inconvenienced, something moved across his face that she would think about for a long time afterward. Relief, yes. But underneath it something that looked like a man confronting the full enormity of what it would mean to lose something and only then understanding how entirely he could not afford to. He crossed the room and took her face in his hands. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. "I'm fine," she said. "I know." His voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. "Jamin." "Don't," he said quietly. "Just not yet." She put her hands over his. They stood like that in the wreckage of the warehouse door, Seoul's distant nighttime sounds bleeding in from outside, while his men swept the building around them. "I memorized 4 faces and the vehicle registration of their backup transport," she said eventually. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. His forehead dropped to hers. "Of course you did," he said. They dismantled the Shin Network over the following 2 weeks with the particular thoroughness of people who were deeply motivated. Karen handled the intelligence architecture. Jamin handled everything else. They worked at the long table in the estate's main office, sometimes until 3 in the morning, and if their shoulders were touching by midnight most nights, and she no longer moved away when he reached across her to point at something on a document, well, that was its own kind of answer. On the last night, when the final pieces had been set in place, and there was nothing left to do but wait for morning, Jamin pushed the files to the side and looked at her. "When this is over," he said. She looked up. "When this is over," he said again, "I want to have a conversation about what comes next." For us. Not the Empire. Not the arrangement. A pause. Us. Karen set down her pen. She had been waiting for this. She had been afraid of it. She had been practicing the careful distance she would maintain, the logical points she would make about the wisdom of keeping personal and professional separate. She had the entire speech assembled and ready. Okay, she said. He blinked. Okay, she said again, and the careful speech dissolved entirely, because she was tired of being careful, and she was tired of distance, and she knew exactly what she wanted. I want that too. His expression did something complicated and warm and entirely un-Mafia boss-like. I have one condition, she added. Name it. You stop putting tea outside my door and start bringing it in. A pause. Then, slowly, the smile she'd been waiting months to see full, real, unguarded, transforming his face into something almost unbearably human. Done, he said. Besties, are you crying? Because I am. Drop a comment below, are you Team Karen or are you Team Karen? Because there is no other team. Subscribe right now if you want more stories like this. We are just getting to the best part. The following morning, the Shin Network's leadership turned themselves in to external authorities, an outcome Karen had quietly engineered 3 days earlier because she preferred elegant solutions to messy ones. The threat was neutralized without spectacle. Jamin stood in the garden with his coffee and looked at the city and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the ground beneath him was entirely solid. Karen appeared beside him with her own coffee, still in the oversized shirt she'd slept in, her hair down, entirely unbothered. The council is going to want a full debrief, she said. The council can wait until noon. She glanced at him sideways. He glanced back. I talked to my sister last night, she said. She wants to meet you. Does she? She's already decided she doesn't like you on principle, so you'll have to work for it. I've faced down an entire council with guns, he said. I can manage a sister. Karen smiled into her coffee. You think that? They stood in the garden as the city came awake below them, the morning light spreading across Seoul in long gold lines, the way it does in early autumn when the air is sharp and the trees are just beginning to change. He reached over and took her free hand. She let him. She laced her fingers through his and looked out at the city, and felt the shape of her life, this unexpected, complicated, ferocious, quietly magnificent life, settle around her like something she had been walking toward without knowing it. Weeks later, the council convened in the underground hall, the same hall, newly restored, with none of the shadows of that night remaining. The meeting was routine. Empire business, territory agreements, the usual architecture of power that Karen now understood from the inside rather than the outside. She sat beside Jamin at the head of the table. Not decorative. Not ceremonial. Present in the full sense of the word, with her notepad and her assessments and her absolute willingness to tell any man in that room exactly what she thought if the occasion required it. Afterward, as the council filed out, one of the elder members, a man named Chairman Beck, who had been doing this for 40 years and had the weathered gravity to show for it, stopped beside Karen. You should have a formal role, he said simply. The Empire is stronger with you in it than outside it. Karen looked at Jamin. Jamin looked back at her with the expression of a man who had been hoping someone else would make this argument for him. I have conditions, she said. Chairman Beck almost smiled. I assumed you would. That evening, Jamin found her in her office, their office now, the second room having been quietly converted, her monitors alongside his, her bookshelves alongside his. The careful geographic separation of those early months dissolved as completely as it deserved to be. She was typing. He stood in the doorway. Beck's right, he said. I know. She kept typing. I've already drafted a proposal. He crossed to where she sat, leaned down, and pressed a kiss to her temple. She stopped typing. This world is better with you in it, he said quietly. She turned to look at him. Closed like this, she could see the thing in his eyes that was there now all the time, that enormous, careful, complete devotion that he'd once worked so hard to keep contained and now simply let stand, because she'd given him no reason to hide it. You're not bad in it yourself, she said. He sat on the edge of the desk and looked at her, and she looked at him, and somewhere in the city beyond the glass, Seoul turned through its evening rhythms, lights flickering on, traffic moving. The great indifferent hum of a city that had no idea that somewhere in its midst, a mafia boss and his quiet, devastating wife had built something out of a contract and a calculation and several months of very stubborn pretending, and called it, finally, honestly, without reservation, love. Stay, he said. Not as a question. As a fact he was offering her the chance to agree with. Karen closed her laptop. I'm already here, she said. And that, besties, is how the quiet wife walked into a room full of guns and walked out with the whole empire. If you made it to the end of this story, you are officially family. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite moment. Was it when Karen pressed that button and the lights went out? Was it Jamin going after her? Was it that garden scene? Because I need to know. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a good story today, and subscribe to Afrohan Tales for more dark romance, more fierce women, more complicated men who deserve to be humbled and reformed. Welcome to the family, bestie. We'll see you in the next one.